The brilliant African-American poet Nikki Giovanni died on December 9th, 2024. Though not a Unitarian Universalist, the UUA wrote in memoriam, she was one of the most celebrated poets of our time, a revolutionary voice in the Black arts movement, and a champion of social justice. Giovanni used her words to challenge oppression, celebrate love, and reflect on the human condition. Now, during Black History Month, I want to talk to you about Nikki Giovanni and her poetry that so strongly aligns with the Unitarian Universalist values of social justice and racial equality, making her work a powerful tool to inspire reflection and action within our congregations, particularly regarding the experiences of Black Americans. Here's a poem of hers called Ego Tripping. There may be a reason why. I was born in the Congo. I walked to the Fertile Crescent and built the Sphinx. I designed a pyramid so tough that a star only glows every 100 years, falls into the center, giving divine, perfect light. I'm bad. I sat on the throne, drinking nectar with Allah. I got hot and sent an ice age to Europe to cool my thirst. My oldest daughter is Nefertiti. The tears from my birth pains created the Nile. I am a beautiful woman. I gazed on the forest and burned out the Sahara Desert. With a packet of goat's meat and a change of clothes, I crossed it in 2 hours. I am a gazelle, so swift, you can't catch me. For a birthday present, I gave my son Hannibal an elephant. He gave me Rome for Mother's Day. My strength flows ever on. My son Noah built new ark, and I stood proudly at the helm as we sailed on a soft summer day. I turned myself into myself and was Jesus. Men intone my loving name. All praises, I am the one who would save. I sewed diamonds in my backyard. My bowels deliver uranium. The filings from my fingernails are semi-precious jewels. On a trip north, I caught a cold and blew my nose, giving oil to the Arab world. I'm so hip, even my errors are correct. I sailed west to reach east and had to round off the earth as I went. The hair from my head thinned and gold was laid across 3 continents. I'm so perfect, so divine, so ethereal, so surreal, I cannot be comprehended except by my permission. I mean, I can fly like a bird in the sky. In 2 minutes or so, the poem Ego Tripping gives us a remarkable amount of insight into Nikki Giovanni. To me, it feels like she's offering a history of the world or of the earth, or perhaps she is telling the story of a goddess who is both completely ancient and totally modern. Academics talk about this poem as a celebration of Black power and pride. They say it honors Professor Giovanni's African heritage, as well as the accomplishments and the political and spiritual strength and beauty of Black women. I think in some ways it's also a very personal story, her own story. One time, as one of her live performances ended, Giovanni began to say the words, "I was born in the Congo," and the audience erupted in cheers, recognizing the poem that they were about to hear. One person who was there that day said, "As she moved through the piece, I realized she wasn't reading alone. There were all these African American women, that is, all these former teenagers, having memorized that poem years ago for a school or a church performance, reciting ego tripping. They knew it by heart." I was born in the Congo. Here's a poetic portrait of her early days from her poet, Nikki Rosa. Childhood remembrances are always a drag if you're Black. You always remember things like living in Woodlawn with no inside toilet. And if you become famous or something, they never talk about how happy you were to have your mother all to yourself, and how good the water felt when you got into your bath from one of those big tubs that folks in Chicago barbecue in. And somehow, when you talk about home, it never gets across how much you understood their feelings as the whole family attended meetings about Hollydale. And even though you remember your biographers never understand your father's pain as he sells his stock and another dream goes. And though you're poor, it isn't poverty that concerns you. And though they fought a lot, it isn't your father's drinking that makes any difference, but only that everybody is together and your sister and you have happy birthdays and very good Christmases. And I really hope no white person ever has cause to write about me, because they never understand that Black love is Black power, is Black wealth. And they'll probably talk about my hard childhood and never understand that all the while I was quite happy. Maybe some of you are familiar with the remarkable work Krista Tippett does on her program On Being. Well, that was my first encounter with Nikki Giovanni. Listening to her being interviewed, it was obvious that she was a great storyteller, clearly creative, and very funny. But I also got the sense that she was an engaging teacher, a keen observer of life and history, a lover of life and its delights. And there is evidence to support that she was a devoted friend to people like Maya Angelou and Toni Morrison, and a faithful partner to her wife, Virginia Fowler. I felt a need to get to know her better, and the more I did, the more I wanted to share what I learned about her with you in a way that I hope does not violate her wish, but lets her words speak for itself. So who is Nikki Giovanni? Nicknamed the Princess of Black Poetry, she is known around the world for her poetry, essays, and written work. She's unflinchingly explored social issues such as race and gender. She was an unstoppable as she raised her voice, telling the truth about society's many wrongs. She received more than 30 honorary degrees, published at least 11 children's books, illustrated children's books, and even won an Emmy for exceptional merit in documentary filmmaking, the title of which is Going to Mars, the Nikki Giovanni Project. It's worth noting that she was ready to head to Mars long before Elon Musk probably ever thought about it. She drew many accolades during her life. For example, Harrison Smith of the Washington Post wrote that she was a poet of rage and revolution, as well as love and longing. who emerged as a fiery voice of Black liberation in the 1960s. In later years, she became an elder stateswoman among African American poets. About herself, she said, "Me, I only wanted to be a voice, coming as I do from a voiceless people, a people who were denied freedom, a language, an education, coming as I do from a people who had only song with which to tell our story and a poem with which to dream. I wanted to be a voice." She felt that in her long career, she had written poetry about every injustice perpetrated upon Black people, but she didn't want to be only an angry voice. As she often said, you can only be angry for so long. Though she did not neglect Tupac Shakur and Michael Brown when they were killed. So after her son Thomas was born, she started writing children's literature while continuing her truth-telling in book after book of poetry and prose. Many people talk about her extraordinary activism for the causes of racial and gender equality, but I'd like to share an historical side of her efforts, and it has to do with a prose poem she wrote about the Pullman Porters. Do you know about their role in the civil rights movement? Admittedly, I didn't really know that much. According to a website called Super Summary, the Pullman Porters were Black men who worked as valets on passenger trains, first hired after the Civil War by Chicago railway magnate George Pullman to staff luxury sleeping cars. Many of these porters were ex-slaves. And History.com says they were hired to be servants, but the Pullman Porters were much more than that. From the beginning, the porters had served as change agents for their communities, carrying new musical forms, jazz and the blues, for example, to the new radical ideas from urban centers to rural areas and from north to south. Before I read an excerpt from Nikki Giovanni's lengthy poem to you, it struck me. Have you ever researched a subject and thought you understood it pretty well, only to have someone come along and offer a whole new dimension? Professor Giovanni did that for me regarding the story of Mrs. Rosa Parks with this poem and its history. The poem is called Rosa Parks. This is for the Pullman Porters who organized when people said they couldn't, and carried the Pittsburgh Courier and the Chicago Defender to the Black Americans in the South so they would know that they were not alone. This is for the Pullman Porters who helped Thurgood Marshall go south and come back north to fight the fight resulted in Brown versus the Board of Education. It was the Pullman Porters who whispered to the travel men, both the blues men and the race men, so that they would both know what was going on. This is for the Pullman Porters who smiled as if they were happy and laughed like they were tickled when some folks were around, and who silently rejoiced in 1954 when the Supreme Court announced its 9-0 decision that separate is inherently unequal. This is for the Pullman Porters who got Emmett Till's body on the northbound train, got his body home to Chicago, where his mother said, "I want the world to see what they did to my boy." And this is for all the mothers who cried. And this is for all the people who said, "Never again." And this is about Rosa Parks, whose feet were not so tired. It had been, after all, an ordinary day, until the bus driver gave her the opportunity to make history. This is about Mrs. Rosa Parks from Tuskegee, Alabama, who was also the field secretary of the NAACP. This is about the moment Rosa Parks shouldered her cross, put her worldly goods aside, was willing to sacrifice her life so that a young man would not have died in vain. But it was the Pullman Porters who safely got Emmett to his granduncle, and Mrs. Rosa Parks, who could not stand that death, and in not being able to stand it, she sat back down. You may recall that last year at this time I shared a pretty detailed story of Mrs. Rosa Parks, who famously refused to give up her seat to a white man, an action that sparked the Montgomery bus boycott. Nikki Giovanni's poem goes on to tell the backstory of that action, the story I never knew, including the Pullman Porters' connection with the civil rights lawyer and Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. Justice Marshall, whose father was a Pullman Porter. Also in her poem, Giovanni uses the metaphor of the train, comparing it to the civil rights movement that requires many people and moving parts to move it forward. Some say it was the Pullman Porters who formed the backbone of the black middle class during segregation. Their descendants, including Thurgood Marshall, former Los Angeles Mayor Tom Bradley, jazz musician Oscar Peterson, and track and field star Wilma Rudolph. Indeed, the legacy of the Pullman Porters has far outlasted both the Pullman Company and Mr. Pullman himself. Nikki Giovanni raised a voice, told the truth, and found a beautiful and powerful way to tell it. She was also an exceptionally effective teacher, rising to the post of Distinguished Emerita Professor at Virginia Tech University, where she taught for 35 years. Her ultimate goal as a professor was to teach students to think deeply and to ask questions. She said, "I want my students not to accept what they are hearing, but to look and say, what kind of sense does this make? And what is going to be the end result?" She won dozens of awards, and in 2005, Oprah Winfrey named her one of 25 living legends. Here is something she said at a talk she gave at Virginia Tech's Moss Art Center. "We can never let words be silenced. We can never let words be taken away from us. We can never let people, because they do not like what we are saying, shut us up. Words are the most important things that human beings have. No matter what the situation, we must always remember to use them." Her last book of poetry, called The Last Book, is set for publication in the fall of this year. May her voice inspire us, and may it continue to be heard.